Hi, my name is Sean, and today we'll be talking about API wrappers in Python. Now, later on in this video, we'll be showing a custom wrapper class for the Reddit API. But before we do that, I think we should discuss some background information. The first of which is what an API is. Those who don't know, an API stands for Programming Application Interface, and its purpose is to allow one software to access the data and functionality of another software. The API sets the rule of how that data is accessed and what format it comes in. Next, I'd like to discuss what an API query is. Basically, an API query is us, the client, making an HTTP request to an API endpoint. And in our Reddit example, our API endpoint will be a subreddit or a subforum that we can get posts and comments from. And once the API has validated all our headers and parameters, it will send an HTTP response, and that response will contain a JSON payload containing all the information that we need, which will include, of course, those comments, authors, and posts. Finally, I'd like to talk about what an API wrapper is. And what an API wrapper is a language-specific package or kit that encapsulates multiple API calls to make complicated functions easy to use. It helps developers call various APIs without the need for the real-time interaction. This is a definition I got from Rabbit API, but to put it more succinctly, it's a way to make API calls more intuitive and easier to automate or understand. An example would be Praw, which is Reddit API's most commonly used API wrapper. Basically, Praw, what we'll do is streamline everything so that you can access specific information in a few lines of code. I highly recommend it if you want to do any web scraping for data science purposes or analytics. For instance, you might want to collect the top 10 posts that are hot in a subreddit, or the most upvoted, the most controversial. There's a lot of functionality there, and I highly recommend it. We'll be showing an example later on in the video. So now for our demonstration, what we're going to do is write a quick Python script that will later be compared to our wrapper class. And what we're going to do in this script is, from the data science subreddit, we're going to take 10 comments, and we're going to print out the first 10 titles of those comments. So we're going to use the request module to handle our HTTP requests, and it's going to return a response. This response is turned into a JSON format, and what we're going to do is print this JSON format. So if we run it, what we should get is a JSON format. Yep. So we're interested in this data because that's going to hold all our data. And inside this dictionary, we have another dictionary that holds a list. And inside that list, we have another dictionary. So what I'm interested in is if there's a field called title. So because we want to print all the titles. Let's see here. So I just Control F. And let's see here. Yep, there is a title. You can see it here. So what we're going to do is go back to our function here, and we're going to go and call our data. We're going to call our children. We're going to, because we know that that was a list, we're going to get the first index on that list, and inside we're going to get the data, and we're going to get the title. So if we print J now, we should just get the title of one of them. And indeed, this is the title for our first entry. So if we want to get the titles for the rest of the entries, we are going to need to parse through it somehow. And I borrowed this function from a similar tutorial on Scraping Reddit Without Pro by Bob Granzahl. So Mr. Granzahl deserves the credit for writing this function. But what it does is call this nested function inside, and it does the same thing that we did here. And it's going to yield so that it returns a different result every time. And we're going to put those results in a list and return the list. So if we call it and print it out, what we should get is a list of titles that are printed on each line. And there we go. So here are the lists, how to deal with time series projections that contains code lockdown anomalies. Fortunately, this is all good. And now, if we want to compare this to how our wrapper class performs, what we need to do is import our wrapper that we have right here. Now that we imported our module, now we just need to make a call to our custom wrapper class, and here we go. Yep. So here's our wrapper class. We're going to pass in the subreddit, the limits, headers. We're going to get the list of titles, and we're going to get the post by certain user, Redshift, and we're going to post the title followed by the description of the post. And if we run, what we should get is, yep, so here's the data. I printed it in the class itself, so we didn't post it, say to do it in the tutorial, but it's in there in the wrapper class to print. So we got our list of titles here, and we have the title followed by the description. So these are all written by Redshank. Now, you might remember that an API wrapper encapsulates multiple API calls to make it easier to use. Now, what do I mean by encapsulates? Well, basically, what we do is make a class that handles those API calls inside its functions. And here's a brief outline. So here we have the wrapper class, we have our constructor, so we want to specify what endpoint we have, our headers, ID, and password, and inside we handle the requests, we handle our response, we turn it into JSON, everything we need, so that when we call get posts, all we need to do is perhaps specify how many or get titles, and we enter our parameters in there as well. So the basic concept is all you need to do to access the Reddit API with a wrapper is to instantiate the wrapper and call the posts as necessary. And indeed, if we open up our wrapper module, what we will find is a class that encapsulates the functionality that we did in our script. Now, if you remember, we used a similar function to capture all the titles in a list. Well, here we just get the data so that if we ever call get field, we can just simply type in what kind of field that we want from this list, and we can also filter it out by which user. So hopefully now you can understand how a wrapper can intuitively navigate the Reddit API. So all we needed to do was instantiate it and call its various functions, and we can now filter by title and other fields, as well as get the posts by a certain user. Now, if we wanted to, we could add more functionality. This is a basic example that is designed to illustrate how we can do the same functionality here, but maybe on more succinctly in the future. A better example would be, now to use Praw, we do have to install it as it's not natively in Python. From then we just need to call this function and insert these parameters. And afterwards, what we're going to do is something different. we're going to look at the polls subreddit because all the submissions in the polls subreddit are polls, and that's something we haven't seen before. And we could do the same thing as previously. We could print the title, text, and author, but what we're going to do is just print the title, the total number of votes, and the options and how many people voted for those options. Afterwards, we're going to look at a specific user and get their comment karma and has verified email. If we run our script, what we'll see is what should come up as a bunch of results. We have the title, the total number of votes, and the options of who voted in those votes, as well as for our user that we picked out. That person has 405 comment karma, and he does have a valid email. Just to know what we're looking at, if we go to this subreddit, our polls, we will see that the data, the submissions, are all these mini polls that users can take part in with a title, total number of votes, and we can access the votes for each one. Now that we have this information, the typical thing to do, especially in web scraping, is to store it in some CSV file, but that's out of the scope for this video. I hope you learned something about API wrappers, and I hope you stay safe in these dangerous times. Farewell.